Hey Nick, thanks for joining, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Drew.
Yeah. So I think what we're here to talk about a little bit is about some of the core technical considerations regarding how we integrate mapping solutions to our products. So just as a just as a general sort of primer here. So my name is Drew. I'm a principal front-end engineer for Chariot Solutions. We're a family-owned consultancy in Fort Washington, just about a half an hour outside of Philadelphia. And we specialize in all kinds of software development, or pretty much up and across the stack. We're an expert consultancy, so we have people onshore doing a lot of the core technical work that companies would, typically offshore. They would need really people with highly specialized experience. And it just so happens that in the past couple of, I think, years, we've had a lot more engagement regarding mapping solutions. So I think after talking with some of our salespeople and really understanding kind of the environment right now, we thought it would be good to have a chat between myself and someone else who obviously is in this every single day. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
we thought
awesome.
it'd be good.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Drew. Well, yeah, I mean, happy to maybe start with a little bit about Radar and who we are and how we got into mapping, if that's
Yeah,
interesting.
I would love to hear that. I think that's a great first point.
Yeah, cool. Well, Radar is a geolocation company. We do both maps and geofencing. We actually really got our start as a geofencing platform. So, location tracking and geofencing, primarily for consumer apps. Helping brands and developers do things like sending location-based notifications or build location-based app experiences. And we actually didn't have maps initially. I think if you had asked me back when we started the company, is Radar ever going to get into maps? I would have told you, it's a really tough technical challenge to launch a maps platform. Our sort of primary goal, primary strategy is to, play nicely with Google Maps and Mapbox and Apple Maps and some of the other maps platforms out there. But I think two things happened that kind of prompted us to really get into this space. One is there's been a ton of exciting activity in what I would call the sort of open maps movement over the last couple of years between OpenStreetMap, some projects like Map Libre, Overture Maps Foundation, folks like Amazon and Microsoft and Meta getting involved here. We were basically able to incorporate some of those tools, commercialize some of those tools, and launch a maps platform. And I think the second thing is, and this probably lines up with Drew, some of what you've been seeing and hearing from your customers and in market is folks are really eager for alternatives that are more cost effective or more flexible, easier to integrate, that can maybe do more than just maps. Today we power maps and geofencing for a couple hundred enterprises. Folks like Panera Bread, Dick's Sporting Goods, Geico, Prize Picks, all use our maps platform in some form or another. Yeah, it's just a little bit of context about Radar and been in the geolocation space for over a decade. Our founding team met at Foursquare. For folks who remember the really early location-based social app, they were
Hmm.
one of the earliest Mapbox customers. And so, yeah, I've been thinking about maps and geolocation for a while, and yeah, excited to get into it and kind of get as technical and product oriented as we want.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting that you say that we originally were going to get into mapping, just because from our experience too, the breadth is so wide, right? There's a lot of different products that we see out there that have mapping incorporated. It could be as simple as just displaying your location of a business on your marketing page down by the contact us page, or it could be as complicated as some sort of like indoor tracking system where you're tracking footsteps. So I mean, I think it's really important, especially from our perspective, when we go and we engage with clients, is to kind of just understand the overall problem, so we could effectively see like how we're going to go about solutioning it. So I think jumping right into it, one of the things that we try to identify when a customer comes to us and say we want mapping, we're like, oh, okay. So we have to sit down, we have to kind of really understand stuff. But I think what really comes down to it is the core technical expertise on the team. So, let's say that someone comes to Radar and they say, I want mapping, right? First of all, like what kind of questions are you asking them? And then secondly, how do you sort of siphon that off and make sure that the team that you're going to put on that is going to be ready and going to have the skills necessary to be able to actually implement the stuff that,
Hmm.
that they need?
Yeah. I mean, I think, and we approach it this way, whether it's a mapping use case or a geofencing use case, is really just sort of understanding what are the primary use cases, what's the ideal business outcome, or product outcome, whether it's, hey, I want to deliver this great experience, whether it's I want to sort of derive this new insight about geolocation data that I have or that I'm collecting. So really starting with the use case, I think is really important.
Hmm.
Radar is it's a platform, it's infrastructure, it's a developer tool. So we're really focused on the kind of end user facing product experience aspect of maps. There's a whole other kind of universe of what you might call sort of location intelligence or GIS, where
Hmm.
you're analyzing geolocation data that maybe you've collected offline, or you're visualizing something. We're really focused on powering product experiences in mobile or web apps. Things like store locators or nearby search and discovery experiences,
Hmm.
address autocomplete, maybe on a checkout form, address validation, routing and route optimization, maybe getting into more sort of logistics use cases.
Hmm.
And once we have a good understanding of the use cases, we can start to be prescriptive about, hey, here's the APIs you need to use. You're going to need, a front end engineer or back end engineer, or some
Hmm.
combination of the two. And a lot of our customers and prospects are switching off of an existing Maps platform. So we have conversations about what the current integration looks like, what dependencies you've taken on the data, or maybe like the format of the API responses or whatever. And you tend to optimize for slightly different things if you're doing a rip and replace versus kind of a first time integration. But I think what we
Yeah.
found is a lot of our enterprise customers, they built a store locator 5 or 10 years ago, haven't touched it since,
Oh,
and
okay.
maybe their bills have gone up a lot, or there's a lot more they could be doing with maps and geolocation, but they just haven't made the time or they don't have the budget. And so we think a lot about well, how do we do better and make a migration seamless from your existing provider, but also like what else can we unlock in terms of new use cases you might build.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty interesting. And from our perspective, at least on the consulting side, a lot of clients come to us are almost primarily greenfield, or they've had a little bit of taste of some sort of mapping solution that they had, like you said, that's been it's kind of been legacy for almost 10 years now. There's obviously more capabilities, but um, from our side, it's more of like a we have to show them or we have to basically understand their use case like you were saying, and then we have to basically show them here's the things that you can do now, because I feel like there's a massive gap in necessarily like what was available and what they're used to now, like all especially like standardizing on a lot of the GIS services and things like that. There's so much that you can do between like fencing and geographic validation.
Hmm.
And I mean, when I first got into it, I was like, man, I can project the Earth in like 14 different ways and in like a 2D space. I mean, there's so much that goes into it now that a lot of what we do sometimes is really, like you said, understanding the use case and then trying to further say like, okay, well, that's your use case, but did you know that you can do this, or did you know that you can
Yeah.
add this for a relatively low upfront cost? So,
Yeah, totally. I think if you're just getting started, maybe you're building a new app, or you're a startup,
mhm.
you're probably thinking about how can I find a tool that's great in the short term, but it's also going to be great in the long term and is going to grow with me.
Scale for sure.
You probably have some budget constraints where Radar has raised several rounds of funding at this point, but there was a time where we had no funding at all, and so kind of the more generous the free tier or the more cost effective the tool, the better.
Mhm.
And then on the other hand, we work with big enterprises that maybe they were spending 6 or even 7 figures on their existing Maps platform. They haven't touched it in a while, or they've even sort of, cut corners, maybe put the map behind like a show map button, or
Yeah.
resisted adding additional features just to keep costs under control. And one thing we're able to do with both a more cost-effective platform, but also a more flexible and powerful platform in the sense that we have geofencing and location tracking as well, is it's like if you're spending 100 grand on your Maps platform per year, do you want to get just Maps or do you want to get Maps and geofencing and the ability to customize your maps and kind of use more Maps APIs in more places,
Sure.
do more with less. Um, so
That's an interesting. I guess that's an interesting point. Is how do you guys go about? Um, I'd say maybe recommending a product that you have, and then also balancing the cost of the customer. Because I know a lot of what we experience is that we have people that come to us with more of a project proposal, and then the more complex you get, the more services you add, the more actually upfront costs that you have, and the more subscriptions that you have. But how do you guys balance? How do you guys balance like what is out there as far as open source solutions go with maybe like a open street map or an open layers or some of the other providers like Mapbox versus trying to say like, hey, this is radar and this is what we represent.
yeah, it's a good question. I would say, flexibility, extensibility is a really key part of our DNA. Like we think of ourselves as a developer tool at our core, and so flexible APIs, customizability is really important. But we also want to be prescriptive, and a lot of times folks come to us and they say, "Hey, what are the most innovative, product teams or digital teams in my industry doing?"
Oh, really? Okay.
They're looking to understand. Yeah, I mean, maybe they're looking to understand like, hey, like what are we not thinking about that we could be doing with geolocation, and kind of depending on whether you want us to be prescriptive or whether you're coming to us with a vision and you want to implement it, we can sort of do either, and it sort of differs. You know, brand by brand, company by company.
Hmm.
I think at the end of the day, we'll also work within your budget. And so if you're trying to cut costs or if you're trying to, get as much as you possibly can within a budget, that's something we can do. But also, I think there's a lot of upside to be unlocked here, right? You're trying to use geolocation to hopefully build an engaging experience on the consumer side, or one that's more frictionless,
Hmm.
right? So maybe you're thinking about how you use address autocomplete to boost conversion on a checkout flow and increase revenue. Like let's make an investment in Maps that pays for itself. Or maybe on the logistics side, you don't have as much visibility, or you're not using geolocation as much as you could be or should be to like optimize the routes your delivery drivers are taking, or
Okay.
something like that. So oftentimes there's you're thinking about the ROI component of like, all right, I'm spending, 100 grand on Maps. Maybe that's, you're saving 100 grand relative to your current provider, but maybe it's a net new investment, but you can drive a 1% increase in checkout conversion, or, a 5%, increase in some operational metric. So I think all of that factors into the ROI decision and the, prescription of the solution.
Yeah, I mean that's actually a very helpful thing for us. I mean, as well on the consulting side, because typically we're some of the first people that are engaged on like so let's say a new project proposal or something like that, and a lot of times we don't have sort of that extra, I'd say, four more steps after the initial implementation. Like we have sort of the schedule of what costs are going to be. We have the upfront costs. We have subscriptions, but I mean, for I guess integrating with someone like Radar and what you guys do, having that extra like, hey, these things will specifically, convert by 1%, or they're going to speed up your load time because we're asynchronously loading things in like web workers and we're taking the speed off the main thread and so on and so forth. So I mean that's actually like really interesting because that's something I never really thought about trying to factor in because
Hmm.
we're so into the weeds about how to actually go about the technical implementation that sometimes I think we lose a little bit of sight of what are the positive customer impacts that we're actually trying to drive.
Yeah, totally. And we love to, share case studies if helpful to sort of inspire some of these things. We have some really cool reporting functionality in our dashboard. If you come to us and you say, hey, I want to use geofencing to drive, this behavior, more app opens or more transactions or whatever, we have some tools to measure that. And, we have a really amazing, solutions engineering and customer support team that can be as kind of hands-on, as makes sense. And we love working with agencies too, because I think they also will kind of inject some inspiration and best practices. So yeah, totally.
Yeah, I mean, so from the data side, when we're asked to evaluate different mapping solutions, one of the first things I say, and I stop pretty much every client and their tracks from saying, where is this data coming from, right? Because we're big believers in garbage in, garbage out, and if we're not getting good sanitized data, then we're not going to be able to give you like good like visual results. We're not going to be able to place things in the real world plane properly. You know, if we don't have the necessary data structures and like the data sources that drive this stuff, then it's really not necessarily a value add for them. So I guess the first part of the question is where do you guys get your data from? You know, you mentioned Foursquare, and I saw that they just open sourced pretty much their entire, I think their entire like I don't know
Hmm.
what you call it, like their
That's
entire
database.
GIS database almost,
Yep.
which is crazy. I mean, I feel like we're starting to see a lot more of that,
Hmm.
especially in the open web. So first, like, where do you guys source it from, and how do you source it? And then from all that, how do you like sort of ensure and guarantee that that data actually is sanitized and it's the right data?
Hmm. Yeah, great question. So we use a mix of open and commercial data sources. I would say, open data sets are getting better. There's some really exciting projects underway. I'd also maybe distinguish between like base map data. So what are you seeing on the map?
Hmm.
Address data, point of interest data, other potential data sets like road networks, et cetera. Those can be quite good, or not, and so it often sort of depends on the type of data
Yeah.
set. It depends on the country. OpenStreetMap, as far as base maps go, I think of OpenStreetMap as sort of like a Wikipedia for maps, like quite good for base map data.
Hmm.
A little spotty when it comes to address and point of interest data. Companies like Facebook have produced kind of like sanitized versions of OSM data that will
Okay.
filter out kind of garbage data or inappropriate words or whatever. There's a new project called Overture Maps Foundation, which is sort of a consortium of like Meta and Microsoft and I believe AWS and handful of others as well. I would also say, kind of calibrating on the level of data quality required for a certain use case is important.
Okay.
It's very different if you're saying, "Hey, I want to type in the name of a city or a postal code and see kind of like a zoomed out view on a map," than if you need to have like perfect kind of rooftop level accuracy for geocoding, or you want to do address validation down to like, is this a mailable address, or you want to know all of the units in a building, for example.
Okay.
When it comes to point of interest data, open data sets often will have like large footprint places like airports or sports stadiums or things like that, and then kind of hit or miss on the more detailed point of interest data.
Like restaurants and local
Yeah,
shops and mom
right,
and pop
right, right.
businesses.
And you can kind of go a step further and like, what attributes are you looking for? You looking for the name of a place and the category of a place, or are you also looking for like operating hours and ratings and photos and things like that?
Sure.
We license commercial data sets to fill those gaps. So we license some commercial point of interest data. We license some commercial address data. We actually just announced limited availability of international address coverage at our customer conference a couple months ago. And basically, you can get pretty far with open data, and there's some really amazing projects out there. It's getting better, but for real enterprise grade use cases, making sure you're layering in those commercial data sets is important. One thing we'll often do if you're migrating from an existing solution is maybe you have some sort of benchmark in terms of like conversion rates, and you want to A/B test radar versus another mapping solution. Let's make sure that we're not dropping conversion just to cut our maps costs. Interestingly, we do a handful of things like auto completing like unit numbers or apartment numbers quite well, and some of our customers have actually seen conversion rate increases, which is
Really?
cool.
Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, the sort of dream situation would be you switch to radar, you cut your maps bill by six figures, you actually see a nice conversion rate boost, and you unlock geofencing capabilities beyond maps. That's
Hmm.
the dream that we're shooting for, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. I mean, that's kind of the dream that we're advising for, to be honest, as consultants. It's almost like a map evangelist project, to be perfectly honest, where there's so much that you can do by getting started off of using the right data sets and using the right technologies, that a lot of it is, I mean, I found it to be so expansive when I first dove into it. We recommend using open layers for a lot of reasons, just for the sole purpose of keeping things open source. So
Mhm.
sometimes a client will come to us and say that, we want to use open layers because it is open source and we want to feed and contribute into the open source world. And sometimes we'll get clients that come with us and say that we want to lock our data completely down. And how do we make sure that this is ours? So, understanding the data behind what drives those technologies, I think is super important. I mean, it's definitely helpful for us.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think on the flip side too, we're obviously, as consultants, we're trying to give and trying to promote the brand and trying to make sure that the solutions that we deliver are brand centric. What are some of the things that you think about when a brand comes to you and says that, hey, I need to use radar, or I need to use, something like a derivative of radar for this specific use case? How do you, what are the things that you think about as a leader of your company to make sure that you're giving the proper solutions that style correctly, maybe brand or white label those solutions? How does that kind of fit into radar's overall, product strategy?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it goes back to that kind of point about flexibility and customization, and at the end of the day, delivering great experiences, right? So that might take the form of, hey, you can kind of use our APIs in a kind of non one size fits all way to deliver the type of experience that you want to deliver. We'll often like sit behind the scenes to power, a location aware experience that just fits really seamlessly within your broader app experience. And so that's kind of the default state for geofencing. But when it comes to maps, a really nicely branded map with like your brand colors or
Yeah.
brand fonts can go a long way. And also kind of flexibility in how you can use the data, right? Oftentimes, some other maps platforms have restrictions on how long you can cache the data for, or if you're using our geocoding or search APIs, you have to display that data on one of our maps. And so we'd rather give folks the flexibility.
So it's very much like a composed strategy for you guys, where you have the bits and pieces that you can hook into, but
Mhm.
at the end of the day, it's kind of like you can use all the puzzle pieces. You can use one of the puzzle pieces.
That's right. Yeah, think of it like a box of Legos, and you can use the Legos to build whatever you see fit. And we'll also give you some nice instruction manuals with the Lego sets if
Yeah.
you
Give you
want
the
to
good people with the Legos too.
talk. Yeah, that's
Don't have
right.
to buy the whole box set.
Yeah, that's right. I think at the end of the day, too, geolocation in maps is a very tough problem. I don't want to call it a solved problem, but we want to help you, implement a best-in-class, geofencing solution or maps platform so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel, and you can get back to, building out the parts of your product or service experience that are unique to you. And so there are times when it makes sense to build something in-house. But when it comes to maps, it's like, how do we make the migration or the integration really straightforward and let you get back to doing the stuff that really makes your business or your product unique?
Yeah, I mean, as an engineer, I really appreciate that too, because there's never a single solution, and there's never sort of a one size fits all silver bullet that you're going to be able to throw at a problem. Most of the times, especially in a lot of the minor frameworks that we use bits and pieces of it. We don't really use all of it. We use some of it. And with a product that has the ability to compose bits of it, whether you're using part of the API or using, a specific part of like the client library, having those hook-ins is indispensable too. I mean, that's kind of one of the things that, I as an engineer evaluate when I go in and look for a specific library. It's like, all right, this is great. This core functionality is fantastic, but how do I break out of it? Because there's no problem that we've never had to say that, okay, this is it. Here's your nice shiny box and we can move on with life. But,
Totally.
I almost see it like, would you say that you guys are almost kind of like mapping as a service to a certain degree, where, much like you get authentications of service and like Auth0, where it's a lot of solved problems, but there's maybe the value of the product isn't actually how you allow other people to solve within integrating with that solution?
Yeah, I think it's fair to call it, a service or a platform. And I think, Maps is one thing. We've got sort of the opinionated defaults and out of the box capabilities, but you can also really, really tinker and customize if you want. We've always had that same mentality when it comes to geofencing as well. And so we have some, presets to like really quickly grab a device's location in a, accurate, privacy conscious way. We've got some tracking presets if you're building a a location-based messaging use case, or you're building a, delivery tracking or ride sharing use case, you can just kind of use our smart defaults. But if you want to go under the hood and tinker with 20 or 30 different, configuration options, you can do that as well. And I think the best
Right.
developer tools are like opinionated, and they just kind of get you going with sensible defaults out of the box. But
Mhm.
then for the real power users and folks who want to customize, you can kind of like open the hood, so to speak, and really tinker.
That's awesome. I think going off of sort of that same vein, so styling and branding is one thing. Going in and messing with the default configurations is another thing. Making your same defaults insane depending upon, how far you want to go down the rabbit hole. But I think one of the things that I tend to evaluate too is not just giving the brand experience, but also making sure that brand experience is snappy.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of things that we can use now, specifically on the front end, because a lot of these libraries aren't necessarily server side loaded. They're more like client libraries that need to use the window context, the document context to be able to attach themselves.
Mhm.
Looking at you open layers, but how do you like? What are some of the things that you guys look for if a client comes to you to make sure that you can tell them that, hey, not only is this going to be what you're looking for, but it's going to be performant. It's going to
Mhm.
perform on the iPhone SE. It's going to perform on like, I don't know, Android, but lower Android devices.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I think there's always trade-offs. Like as much as you'd like to say we've got perfect latency and perfect battery efficiency, and sometimes you're sort of forced to choose.
Sure. Yeah.
Going back to the point about like really understanding a customer's use cases and needs, really understanding like what do you want to optimize for? Do you want to optimize for fast load times? Do you want to optimize for accuracy and level of detail? With maps, I think it's sort of like pop in the best tools, pop in the best data sets,
Hmm.
and make sure that the APIs are low latency, high availability, flexible. When we think about kind of geolocation use cases more broadly, I actually wrote a blog post about this a while back. It's like think about you're building out like a Dungeons and Dragons like or RPG like character map, and you have like 10 character points to evaluate, and it's like
All right.
how many do you want to allocate to accuracy? How many do you want to allocate to like frequency? How many do you want to allocate to battery efficiency? Because obviously, if you're asking the GPS to collect location more often, it's going to drain more battery, and if you're asking for higher accuracy, it's going to drain more battery. So
Yeah. More stuff is more resource intensive for sure.
yeah, yeah, that's right. So, but I think at the end of the day, really understanding like what is the ideal end customer experience, or what is the ideal kind of product or business outcome or operational outcome, and then sort of optimizing accordingly is how we think about it.
What about platform? Like, do you guys figure out, are you more like platform intensive, saying, hey, you can only use this on a MacBook, or you can only use this on something that runs like an A2 chip, or um,
Yeah, it's a good question. When it comes to kind of the broader geolocation, newer smartphones have newer location APIs. They're more
for
accurate.
sure?
If you watch, WWDC or Google I/O, like the blue dot gets a little more accurate on the map every year. And so,
I hope.
yeah, it does, and it's a software thing, it's a hardware thing, it's a cell tower infrastructure,
Yeah.
thing. But we work with a lot of startups that are building with the latest and greatest, and we also work with a lot of bigger enterprises that have maybe older users on older devices, or a lot of international customers. So again, we sort of try to give you the choice of like we want to be as back compatible as possible. But you think about where things are going from a mapping perspective. A lot of the I think folks are 10 years ago were sort of used to like the kind of raster maps. You click and it loads in all these tiles, and now where
Yeah.
things are going is kind of really slick vector maps, and like WebGL and things like this. So if you're optimizing for really great end user experience or really rich visualizations of the data, yeah, you may have to sort of make some trade offs or optimize for
Mhm.
newer devices.
Yeah, we've seen that too, especially on our side. I mean, trying to balance the performance perspective as well as like, hey, we want to give you a solid experience, but also we want to give you we want to make sure it's performant. There's a lot of push and pull between like how you're generating vector tiles and like the specific zoom level you can go with the fidelity,
Hmm.
whether you're choosing over zoom or under zoom. versus just going straight SVG or straight vector or straight GeoJSON, going all the way in, as far as you possibly can.
Hmm.
And that's one of the things I think that we've tried to balance too, is that every solution that we've evaluated has different ways of either like factoring in WebGL to make things more performant, but almost always vector has always been has always kind of been like the best version. It's like it's easily the most stylable from what we've
Hmm.
seen. It's probably the easiest to manage just because it's structured data, and that's something that we
Yeah.
can expect. I mean, rasters anywhere are tough to manage. And the pipelines to convert whatever your vectors are into rasters is also pretty involved too. So that's more
Yep.
services, more costs, more build time, more CI time, so on and so forth. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
Cool. Well, I mean, look, this has been awesome. It's really nice to have another varying perspective, especially on the product side, because we're so in the weeds on how we're delivering our solutions to our customers, how we're doing it, performant and cost effective. But it's really nice to have like a good leadership perspective on how you guys are positioning yourselves in the market and how you can potentially fill in the extra steps that we necessarily might not ultimately think of. So
Yeah.
appreciate all the information, man. It's been a great conversation.
Yeah, you bet. Maps are fun. I think they're just kind of inherently fun. They're fun to build
Yeah.
with, and I think whether you're looking at kind of commercial data sets and enterprise providers, or you're looking at kind of open data sets and some really interesting projects out there. There's just a lot going on. There's a lot changing. I think it's great for developers and big brands alike. So yeah, appreciate the time and appreciate the opportunity to chat about some of this stuff.
It is fun, man. You nailed it. It's awesome. I mean, for the core part of my entire career as a junior, mid level, senior, and then now principal front end engineer, a lot of it's been tables and buttons, right? And now we're getting to a lot of like really dynamic stuff, and really taking advantage of the WebRTC, and it's going crazy right now. And I think
Yeah,
maps are probably one of the more exciting things that I've worked on. So it's been a real pleasure talking to you, man.
I would agree. Awesome. Thanks, Drew.
Yep. Thanks.